All right, folks, welcome to another day, another dollar, another night. Anyway, I'm not going to go down the rap song quoting trail because that doesn't end well for my future career. But folks, we love having you here. Thank you for being here. It's been a really fun week. We've gotten to talk about realignment. You saw Drake and I's thoughts on it Wednesday, possibly yesterday. So I have a two-parter in the hopper, Drake and I. But depending on how Dave and I's combo goes today, this may be Friday's episode, maybe Thursday's episode. There's really no way to know until you know. So, if you don't know, now you know. And if you haven't subscribed to YouTube, do us a favor, subscribe, because we love that you're here every day, and it makes us feel warm and fuzzy to see those subscriptions go up and know that you want to keep coming back and you want to get notifications and you want to see us come to you 3 days a week during the off season and 5 days a week during the season. But Dave, that's enough of that. Today we have a very, very important announcement, and that is that Monday, 4 or 5 star, depending on where you look at it, prospect out of Clearwater International, Lucas Simmons, a legacy on the offensive line, 6'7", around 300 pounds or so, is going to make his commitment decision. He is going to choose between Florida State. I exited his Twitter with his other hats, but frankly, it doesn't really matter who the other choices are.
Florida, Tennessee, USC.
That's fine. Don't care. So Florida, Tennessee, USC, but most importantly, Florida State is on there.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Now, this kid's an interesting prospect. He's the number 141st prospect in the country. But he's also sort of a foreign prospect. So his dad was Swedish, came over here, played American football. Then he went back to Sweden. I admittedly don't know when exactly Lucas moved to the U.S., so I don't know how long he's been playing American football. I want to say it's 5 or so years, maybe less. You watch his tape, and there's a lot to like. But I will say, and this isn't me just like Dave preparing to be hurt again, I will say I think he needs to learn how to use his size a little better. He doesn't really play like someone who's 6'7".
Oh, Max, let me break down what you're saying. He plays like a soccer player? Is that what you were going to say?
No, not that bad.
That's what European soccer...
No. He plays... Like if you're 6'7", 300 pounds, right? Proportionally, that's still you're a very large human, but that's very tall. 300 pounds is not that heavy at 6'7". At 6'7", you want to see someone at 330,
340. Yep.
So I think there's he plays like he kind of thinks he's a skinny kid still. He's not a wimp. He's decent at the point of attack. He's a good blocker. He's the 150th, whatever I said, 180th ranked player in the country for a reason. I just feel like there is some development there. Like, I don't feel like he's a day one plug and play type. Go ahead.
And I don't think, just like with this last class with Julian Armella, I don't think even these highly rated legacies you necessarily want coming in and starting day one. And if they are, that's an indictment more of the current situation. And I also worry about rooting their development. There's all those things. You just don't want offensive linemen or really defensive linemen to have to go in day one and even really compete for a starting job. Like, he should be learning on the job. That's how it always used to be.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So you're right. You don't want him playing day one. So it's not like a running back where that's a huge knock on the kid. And look, I will say, if we land him, that's another win for Alex Atkins.
Yep. And
I think more importantly, because Alex Atkins has been racking up the wins, you don't have to rely on this kid to start day one. Because 2 years ago, man, definitely 3 years ago, but even as recently as 2, maybe even last year, it was like, well, can this kid start on day one? Because that might be what we need. And
right.
I got to say, it's just as a fan of Florida State, and I'm sure everyone listening to this feels the same way, it's really nice to be talking about offensive line prospects and be like, all right, and if he signs, we won't have to see him on the field until 2025. And he'll actually have put on some college muscle and have learned the playbook.
Well, see, that's another thing about the transfer portal that we can use to our benefit, which is Get these guys that can come in and play now while we don't have to force these younger players into, unnecessarily early playing time. And I'm going to keep bringing him up, even though he's not a lineman, but James Blackmaning every offensive lineman that comes here.
You're absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think that this coaching staff, every coaching staff knows that that's the goal, but the coaching staffs here haven't had the opportunity to let kids develop. So it's good to know that we will have that. Let me ask you this though, man, because I wouldn't ask anybody but you this, but you'll have a very unique opinion on this.
Yeah.
How do you feel about commitments though, given the past year? Like, are you ready to get hurt again? Are you believing them when you see a big time defensive lineman put on the Florida State hat in Alabama? Or are you still a little sour in there?
Yeah, Max. So I said to you yesterday, it was yesterday or the day before in a text, we have to care about recruiting only because of, for example, how Miami's recruiting. So it makes us have to care. And when we land a big prospect or when we're in it for a big prospect, we have to care. I'm forcing myself to care, and I know your opinion, until they're literally living in a student housing on campus in Tallahassee, I will believe it when I see it. Yeah. Because I'm ready to get hurt again. Sure. I mean, I'm over the Travis Hunter thing already. Good luck. But everyone else at this point, I just need to see him on campus. Commitment doesn't mean commitment anymore. That word, by definition, doesn't mean what kids are using it for and what recruiting services are using it for. It means loose, I'll see you when I see you, right?
Would you say a loose affiliation similar to an alliance that perhaps two conferences might make? Something akin to that?
Oh, yeah. That's probably a good segue, isn't it, Max? Yeah,
that is a good segue.
Thanks.
But I will say I am in trust but verify mode in the sense that I don't believe any kid anymore is going to come to Florida State until they sign a national letter of intent. However, it's better to get commitments than not get commitments.
Right.
So it's I'm never going to be, I think I see on Twitter, some people almost are over salty. It's well, we'll see if Norvell can keep them. It's you're right, we will see. But you have a better chance of keeping a kid that is saying he's going to come than a kid who's telling you he's definitely not going to come to your school.
Well, and here's the other thing, and I said this in my text to you also, perception's reality. And here's the deal. When you're talking about kids wanting to come play in a class, I think it's easier to envision yourself, buying into Florida State and what they're doing more if other highly ranked kids are committed there. It shows just, it's like when somebody's in a relationship, you can at least assume, well, one person likes them, so they must not be too terrible.
Yeah. Is that what you tell yourself?
Yeah, right. But no, it's when you see other kids committed there that are highly ranked, you're going to go play with higher rated kids, but also obviously there's something good going on at Florida State. If no one's committed here, it makes you wonder if you're not Bama, because they get everybody they want at signing day, early signing day. But for most schools, fill up your class as early as you can, get the momentum going. We need momentum. The perception of how we're recruiting matters to other recruits.
Yeah, and again, look, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but legally there is no coordination allowed between the team and the athletic department and NIL deals.
Right.
So I think it's also really helpful to get kids' names out there earlier, because then boosters know who they need to try to hang on to. Right. And in the world we live in today, we're going to need the boosters, and we're going to need people with money, and we're going to need these collectives to help us hang on to the kid for the next 7 months. So I think that it's one of those things where, get his name out there early. It's not just us saying it. It's him committing. It's him getting on the Twitter. It's him doing all that. And I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, and you saw a lot of stuff on Twitter from the more persistently negative folks about how clearly Mike Norvell just can't recruit. This was as early as a week ago. So this came at a very much needed time for the sanity of a lot of the fan base, I feel like.
Let me ask you this then, because I think a lot of people's frustrations with our staff recently was rooted in the success of the Miami staff. And I have two questions within one. One, do you make anything of that? I mean, it is a good narrative that we compete with Miami, and we do compete with Miami, but how much do you look at it as a head-to-head thing like that? And also, is it fair to look at this staff and go, well, look what Miami's doing. You're not doing that. but not also turn our head the other way and say, yeah, but look at what Florida's doing right now, and we're doing a lot better than that, right? So how does I'll stop and let you elaborate.
Yeah, so it isn't fair, I think, on the one hand to say compare yourself to Miami and say we're not doing that good, but not also look at Florida and say we're doing better than that. It is difficult to credibly argue at this point that Mike Norvell is not recruiting better than Billy Napier, that Mike Norvell's kind of vision and plan that's in place right now, and I know he's further along, but isn't looking to be more effective than Billy Napier's, who looks like he has no idea what the hell he's doing, especially with recruiting, following in the long line of tradition of Dan Mullen doing the exact same thing. But as it relates to Miami, yeah, I think it should be a direct comparison. Like, for example, if Miami landed the number 1 ranked recruiting class, that would matter. Again, the perception of it is a real thing. Like, if Mario Cristobal is known to be a good recruiter and he goes down there and he recruits, I'm not saying we necessarily have to keep up to maintain competitiveness with them, because I don't think he's a very good on-field coach. And Kyle Whittingham, I think, would agree with that for sure. And among other people, but it's the lifeblood of the program. You have to look at your main rivals, Miami being one, who's in the same conference, and you have to wonder why it is that we can't keep up with them if we're not. I don't think there's a good reason. I don't think they should be recruiting any better than us, because we're in a relatively similar position, notwithstanding the fact Miami went into last year and people thought, wow, they're playing Bama, this could be a good year for Miami, and then they just got their teeth smashed in.
Wasn't a good year for them. I mean, It wasn't the worst year. Like, they were kind of weird last year, right? Like, Miami, I mean, this isn't Locked on Canes. There is a show for that. You guys can look up their year or whatever, but they I agree with you. I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's not just that it's Miami, and it's the fact that they're in the same conference, they're in the same state. Like, resourcing wise, they have a billionaire allegedly that's going to fund all this stuff, but they also have not historically had infinitely more resources than we have. So I think it is a fair comparison, but I do worry about people being too prisoner of the moment and, like, getting into that mode where everything Miami does is great and everything we do really isn't as good as it looks because more about what we do, right? Like, Miami landed a big quarterback commitment that they allegedly paid $9.5 million for. And folks, if you think a quarterback is valued based on what someone is willing to pay them to play football, I would direct your attention to Brock Osweiler.
Yeah.
I would direct your attention to Jamarcus Russell. There are so many examples of overpaid quarterbacks that never do a darn thing in the league. And now it's crazy to think we won't see that in college, because my man went to Elite 11, which is the camp where you have to get invited to and all these prospects compete against each other, and he didn't make the top 11. You're paying $9.5 million, allegedly, potentially. Let's say it's even lower. Let's say it's $6 million. But you're paying that for a kid that doesn't make the Elite 11. Look, maybe it'll work out, but maybe it won't. So let's not. Sorry. So what I'm getting at is, like, our fan base went nuts as if they just landed Jameis Winston because of what they're paying him. But that's like Zillow inflating the housing value of houses they're buying.
Yeah. Look, recruiting is critical. Don't get me wrong, but
sure,
if Mario Cristobal goes in and lands a great class, and then he lands another one, and they just throw up a dud on the field, those players are going to transfer. Mm-hmm. He won't end up being there that long, and the recruiting will in turn suffer. So if he can't keep it up on the field, which I have reason to believe maybe he can't, despite his recruiting classes, then it's going to be all for naught, and there will be nothing to worry about.
Yeah, and look, here at Locked On Seminoles, we'll be paying very close attention to if Mario Cristobal keeps it up. But I guess the point I'm making to wrap it up is just whatever level of rigor you apply to critiquing the prospects we land, you have to apply that to whomever you're comparing us against. Don't just look at star ratings for one team and go into why our 4 stars aren't really 4 stars on our team if you're not doing that to their team. And if you just want to look at star ratings, that's fine. But then look at them lined up and you'll see, like, hey, we're not getting absolutely lapped right now. Like, they've got a couple good prospects. They're definitely ahead, but we're coming up too. So, Dave, I want to talk about realignment. I want to get your thoughts on it. I think that that's an important topic now because boy, have things exploded. First, quickly, I'm going to tell the folks about Rock Auto. Y'all know about Rock Auto, though. Rock Auto is it's your number one source for all of your online auto parts needs. I mean, look, you need something replaced, go to Rock Auto. You need something repaired, go to Rock Auto. And if you need something you just didn't have before, you can also go to Rock Auto. It is a family business feel with an inventory selection and a pricing model that makes it feel like they are a massive company that can give you great deals. So rockauto.com, everything you need for your car. And in there, how did you hear about a section? Let them know that Locked On sent you. All right, man, it is the moment I know you've been waiting for. We're talking about realignment. Folks have kind of heard our thoughts on it. But in case you haven't been following, which, hey, maybe you haven't. It's your right. You do have the right to be an attorney if you want to. And if you decided you just didn't want to check Twitter for a couple days, USC and UCLA have gone to the Big Ten. Like,
makes sense.
Didn't tell anyone. They just all of a sudden were like, hey, head to the Big Ten.
There were no rumors.
It was
in
literally
the news cycle.
Yeah, is Pete Davidson, Kim Kardashian. It's like, what?
Right.
I'll let y'all figure out who's who in that one. But yeah, it was a big surprise, and I think that led to this volley of speculation, and we've seen everything from people who I am pretty sure have never spoken to a conference official, taking to Twitter to let people know that on Thursday night of July 4th weekend, Michael Alford was locked in the war room negotiating with the Big Ten and the SEC. I can promise you that wasn't happening. And then the blue check marks picked up on it. And, well, Dave, before I let you talk, I guess let me just not bury the lead. Folks, just because something is said on Twitter a lot doesn't make it true. If that were the case,
Stoops would be
I
our
was going to
head
say
coach.
Bob Stoops would be coaching Florida State football.
Yeah.
But Dave, give me your general thoughts. What was your reaction to the USC UCLA news? How do you feel after you've had about a week to simmer on it? What's going through your mind right now?
Well, my thoughts are that it puts the fear into me that I don't want to miss a boat. And I know there's credible arguments to make that there is no missing of a boat by not moving. But what I don't want to do is get into a situation where Clemson senses urgency and dips out to the SEC. And I don't know, maybe Miami does too. I don't know why the hell they would take Miami over Florida State, but it's a big TV market. I don't know. That's a reason. But I don't want like our biggest rivals and the biggest teams in the ACC to leave, and we're stuck in like the AAC version of the ACC. Like that's worst case scenario to me, because no one is going to pay a TV deal to a conference that has lost Clemson and Miami, for example, or Louisville, like its main football powers. That's number one. Number two, it has always felt to me and to a lot of people like Florida State should have probably joined the SEC a long time ago. Like geographically, it seems to make sense. A lot of the ACC is North Carolina and above. It's based in North Carolina, and the core of the ACC always feels like it's going to be centered there, regardless of whether they're the best in the conference or not. It's always felt like a more natural fit. I know there's going to the Big Ten wouldn't be that weird at this point, because what the hell does USC and UCLA have anything to do with like the Midwest and the Northeast? It feels weird that USC would be there. So how weird would it be that Florida State would be there? It would give them another market that they don't have. So that makes sense. But bottom line for me is I want what's best for Florida State. You can talk all day about how, we have such an easier road in the ACC, which is partially true, but most years that doesn't matter. I want the money. I want to build the FOF. I want a football endowment. I want to not have to beg boosters for money to even get the scholarships paid for. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, no, I think that all makes sense, man. So a couple things, starting with point one, right, is we don't want to get left behind seeing Clemson and Miami leave. I will say this. I think there's sort of a dead man's trigger on this, where if Clemson and Miami were to leave, that means one of two things have happened. One, they found a way around the grant of one of three things. One, they found a way around the grant of rights. Very unlikely. Two, some conference has been willing to buy them out of whatever settlement the ACC has worked out, and whatever that number is, some conferences like, we'll pay it, or the schools themselves say, with the money we're making, we'll pay it.
Yep.
Or 3, the ACC as we know it does not exist anymore. I think 3 is the most likely option there.
Yeah.
And for that to happen, Florida State has to leave. This exodus scenario, which I was, not that I have a huge Twitter following, but I was one of the first to kind of throw it out there and be like, yo, this is, you can't have to pay damages to a conference that doesn't exist. That doesn't happen if Florida State stays, plain and simple. I don't think you'll end up with a Pac-12 situation with Oregon where there's talk of like 6 schools leaving out from under them. I don't think there's enough schools in the ACC that could viably find good landing places to make it worth the risk that the conference doesn't collapse.
Yeah.
Secondly, if we looked at option 2, were they able to find a conference willing to buy them out of the grant of rights or pay them enough that they could buy their way out of it? Which, again, we said this yesterday or 2 days ago, there's no set buyout for these grant of rights. It is they own your rights and you owe them breach of contract damages. Now, Drake made the point that every contract has a settlement, right? It's not always on paper. It's just, it exists. And that is true, but it will be a big dollar amount. I mean, Dave, we talked about yesterday, like the deal they have with ESPN currently is like a $1.8 billion deal.
Yeah.
So you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars you're going to owe if you leave.
And if you're South Carolina, you're not voting in favor of your conference buying out Clemson. If you're Florida, you're not voting.
You might, and I'll get to that in a second. But my point was going to be that if there's a conference willing to do that for Miami and Clemson, viewership numbers dictate someone will be willing to do that for us as well.
That's right.
So while I understand the fear and it's like, hey, all this is happening, we got to do something.
Yeah.
There is no getting left behind. There will not be a world where there's 2 super conferences, which I think is where we're going, by the way. That world is not going to exist without Florida State. We made sure that the minute we beat Michigan in the Big House in 1988 or 87, whenever it was. It's true. Like, it's not going to happen. The brand is too nationally based. We get too many viewers of our mediocre team, right? When we're bad to not make us a tantalizing draw. Now, with the money thing, Dave, I don't know if South Carolina would vote for that. That's a great point. But the Big Ten currently, I think, is recouping like $150 million from Maryland that they loaned them, and another crazy amount of money that they loaned all around the conference to help with COVID testing protocols that they set up and things like that. So these conferences have a lot of money. I mean, you look, and last year, the Big Ten, I think, brought in like $650 million. The fiscal year before that, they brought in like $750. The SEC over the past 2 fiscal years has brought in same thing, around 1.5, 1.6 billion. Like, they've got some cash. So if they want something, they're going to go get it. And I think as I think on this more, I want your take on it, because I know that you, like me, we get we like to think of the art of the possible, and like what could happen, where could this go? But do you remember 2012, 2013, 2011, when like all this realignment was happening, Missouri and Texas A&M? I mean, could you imagine Missouri and Texas A&M in the SEC? What's happening? Pitt is going to be in the ACC. That's crazy. And like we're like, what is going to it's going to be 4 super conferences. You're going to have 16 teams. You're going to have 64 people moving around these super conferences. And then here we are, still have 5 AQ conferences. We're starting to see some movement, but it's been a decade. Yeah. So when people say, oh, 2036 is so far from now, I agree, it is pretty far from now. From a guy that's going to be 47 years, what am I going to be, like 44 years old then? Oh man, that's a tough pill to swallow. But
Charlie things move. College.
But that's what I'm saying. But things move at a pace, right? And it's like, I would just caution people on assuming because some things have happened, that means this is all going to take place. And like, did you see the tweet today? Somebody with a check mark, hearing Florida State could be in the SEC as soon as 2023. Like maybe, but highly likely not.
Well, okay. So here's what I'll say in response to this version or this iteration of realignment, because the Missouri Texas A&M thing, I did back then think that would trigger movement. Obviously, I'm really glad now the way it worked out that we stayed in the ACC. I think that 2013 team absolutely could have beat any team in the country. And I do think it was one of the best teams of all time. But it's easy to have a slip up when everyone you play is better than the ACC teams you were playing. What I'm saying is, I don't know if that season would have gone exactly the same as it did. Anyways, this version feels different to me because three of the absolute marquee TV rating, just biggest brands in all of college football have moved in the last year. You're talking Texas, Oklahoma, and USC are three of the absolute biggest brands in college football. And that's obviously different than Missouri and Texas A&M leaving, but I don't see how. I don't know what could be more impactful than those particular schools moving around in terms of triggering. All right, let's just get this whole thing started. We all see where it's going. The big boys have made the moves they're going to make. Clearly, they've chosen these two conferences as the ones they're going to take over. It feels inevitable. So it's like they made the move. Why would everyone else wait?
There are a number of factors, and it seems to me, when you look back at the 90s with the SEC getting a championship game and Florida State joining, coming into the ACC and all the different things that happened. And then you fast forward again about a decade or so to the collapse of the Big East, the big realignment. It seems like there's a lot of hurry up and wait. And then all of a sudden these, boom, big dominoes fall.
Yeah.
And like one conference dies. So I don't buy, especially when you look at the Big 12 bringing in whoever it was from the Brooklyn Nets. I forget the gentleman's name, but he was executive with the Brooklyn Nets for a while. He's also worked for Jay-Z's massive company for a while. And, you're bringing in a true businessman. I don't think they're going to be the ones that let it happen. And I know this sounds kind of weird, but there has to be some level of consent to death by these other conferences, because as long as they're playing football, I don't think 28 teams, or let's say they expand a little more and they're at 36, can really just freeze out the rest of football. There's too many eyeballs and there's too much money in college football for that to happen, in my opinion. So if the Big 12 is going to keep fighting, well, the ACC is not going to stop fighting. So I think it's probably going to be the Pac-12 that dies this time, but I think it's only going to be one conference dying. I don't think you're going to have this like rapid, okay, now we're at 64 teams, it's just the Big Ten and the SEC. I think that's where we get by like 2040, but I don't think it happens this decade.
I believe we have a break to take, and then I have two questions I want to ask you that I think will appease my concerns on this topic.
I'm just rolling through, man. Ask away. We'll break later.
Max Moody, you have the vote right now. The Big Ten has today, this 6th day of July, the year of our Lord 2022, offered Florida State membership effective 2023. You have the yes or no vote. Are you leaving for the Big Ten?
Yeah, I'm gone. And I'm not even going to give like a max caveat answer. I mean, I'd want some things for it, but yeah, I'd do it. Now, what are the cons? Well, you have the geography issue. I know that folks have fairly so made the point of like, well, do you want to be in the Big Ten because it'd be harder for fans to travel to games? I admittedly, I've been to a lot of away games, and the presence is always relatively small, even the close by ones. And it's kind of like, Dave, when you have, like, when they say like when you get a raise, like don't start spending it right away.
Yeah.
Like, and then you won't notice it, and you'll be able to save it. I wish that actually worked, but anyway. Sorry, where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. You're already playing people that don't live near you at all. So it's like ripping. You're going from the one to one, in my opinion. Like, I don't think going to Michigan is really that much different than
going to Boston College.
Going to Boston College or Pitt. The difference, I guess, is that you don't have Georgia Tech. Okay, well, you play Georgia Tech right now. The new system, you'll play them once every 2 years. You'll play them on the road once every 4. But as of recently, you've played them on the road once every 12 years. And other than that, you've got Miami. Okay, they're an 8-hour drive away. And Florida, you're still going to play Florida. So
it's an unqualified yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But here's part two. Sure. There's going to be a third question after this. Part two, the SEC today has offered you membership starting 2023. Are you taking it, yes or no?
The Big Ten has not offered me the membership?
Big Ten is not. It's just SEC or nothing.
Oh, this is a tough one. I'm very inclined to say yes. Is anyone coming with us? Is it just us?
Clemson, Miami, Louisville.
Yeah, man. 100%.
Okay, here's my last question then. Big Ten, SEC, we're not leaving. We're staying in the ACC. the ACC is somehow able to offer us the same amount of money, but the entire college football landscape has shifted such that there are those two mega conferences and then everything else.
So do I take money but no championships? Or no. You have to
easier path if you can make it.
Right, but you have earned revenue, right? So like you still make money by going to the playoff. You still make money by going to a championship. You get better coaches. You get better players. The marginal benefit of getting to be in one of the super conferences is greater than the same amount of money in your current conference.
With a theoretically easier path, assuming that path even gets you a spot in a playoff.
Yeah, exactly. Because in the world you're talking about, it's not. It's like saying Cincinnati has an easier path right now. They do, sort of, but they have to win. They have to go undefeated for 2 seasons in a row, and they have to beat some Power 5 team. Like, I just don't think I don't think you have an easier path in that world.
I also think that's such a soft answer. Like, Florida State became what it is because of the we'll play anyone, anywhere, anytime. And for us to say, yeah, we're just going to go ahead and sit all the, big fights out and hope we can squeak in at the end because Cincinnati's now probably banned from the playoffs forever. That just doesn't sit right.
Look, here's the reality. Well, 2 things. One, college football has always been all about money. I'm sorry. Like, I don't know what world these people are living in. And I'm just going to say, I think it's mostly journalists up their own ass that are like, well, the game is changing. And not really. Like, what, the same teams are going to be good year in and year out? It's been like that since the 30s. It was Navy, Georgia Tech, and Notre Dame for a long time. And then it was like, well, first it was the Ivy Leagues, and then it was those schools. And then you saw other schools like the Texas schools kind of start to get involved, but it was really concentrated with the Michigans of the world and the Notre Dames.
And then
Bama, right. And it's like, it's always, in every decade, there's 3 to 6 teams that really dominate the decade, and then there's a few of your splashes, right? Colorado in 96, just like LSU in 2019. Auburn's probably a better example there because LSU was pretty good at the beginning of the decade too. That's the flow and the ebb of college football. It's not changing. Nothing about this sport is changing. Here's the thing. If you like watching college football, if you enjoy watching good teams play each other, everything happening right now is good for you as a fan. If you enjoy watching your team play football, no one's saying you can't. You're still going to be allowed to watch your team play college football. And no one, by the way, is getting left behind. Look at what the Big 12's doing. UCF is now going to get to go to a better conference and play better schools, including BYU, Houston, possibly Arizona, Arizona State. Like, so when people say, oh, the game's getting ruined, I'm just like, what the hell are you talking about? The game is getting better. The product is getting better. Better players are going to teams together, making those teams better, making it more competitive. And if you say NIL is the rich get richer, you're not entirely wrong. But look at what Louisville's doing. Louisville hasn't recruited at a high rate for, a decade now? And all of a sudden they're landing 5-star running backs and good offensive linemen. Look at NC State. NC State has never won 10 games in a regular season, and they've been knocking on the door now 3 years in a row. They've gotten better.
Yep.
So this idea that no one's going to be able to improve, and if you're where you are now is where you're going to stay forever, is just utter nonsense.
Right. And it's all cyclical. We've seen Florida State up. We've seen Florida State down. We're down now. We're not going to be down forever. All right. If you've made it with us this far into the show, I want you to leave an answer in the comments here to this question. And I'm asking you too, Max.
Sure.
2027 season. Are we still in the ACC? And if not, where are we?
2027.
5 years from now.
Yeah. And that's right after. Yes, but we're leaving. I think our most likely exit, if something doesn't happen in the next 6 months, our most likely exit is 2028. And here's how I got there. The ESPN deal. So there's 2 things at play here, right? We have a grant of rights agreement where we have granted our media and television rights. I don't want to say media, our television broadcasting of our games, those rights, to the Atlantic Coast Conference to negotiate on our behalf with television networks. The deal with ESPN, I believe, goes through 2026. I hope I'm right on this. I've been reading about it a lot. I'm very confident I'm right on this. That deal has to get renegotiated, but our rights are still held by the ACC. So we are with the ACC until 2036, but there will be a deal renegotiated in 2026. And I think and I actually am going to throw this one back to you because let me know if this is a thing. If you see a substantial degradation in value from the contract of 2013, 2014, after you've sent Clemson to the playoffs, 3 or 4 times, Florida State's gone to the playoffs and a national championship, you've had some success, right? Then I think that's when we're going to get really fired up and get the lawyers involved and start finding ways out and going, look, you're not being a good steward of our rights that we granted you so long ago that no one that signed that contract works for their member institution anymore in a presidential capacity, in a board of regents capacity, or in an athletic director capacity, and you've bungled the hell out of this. We have to, for the survival of our football program, go somewhere where we make money. And then I think the exit comes, that's 2026. The exit comes, 2 years after that because you find your spot in 26, 27. You announce it for a year or two down the road.
Yeah, it'll depend what the contracts say. I don't know what they say, but I do not think we'll still be in the ACC. I think with ESPN on all sides, the SEC side, the ACC side of the table, they're the ones that ultimately broadcast the games. And I think they're the ones that really pull the strings and will pull the strings to make whatever they want happen. I think the biggest of pieces have already decided what college football is going to look like. And I just can't see a scenario where the inevitable doesn't happen. I think whether it's this offseason or next, you'll see another team go. And I think by 2027, Florida State, like everybody else that matters in this and other conferences that aren't the big two, will have joined one of those two, and that'll be it. And the answer of which one I think it'll be, I do think it'll be the SEC.
This is maybe a crazy thought, but if you're ESPN, do you really want too much consolidation? Because think about it. Right now, you have the rights to you have rights within all 5 of the Power 5 conferences, as well as a slew of Group of 5 teams. Your main competitor is Fox. NBC is kind of locked up with Notre Dame, whatever it is they're doing. And CBS Viacom is probably interested in getting back into the game at some point. And if you have 2 conferences, it's easier to have a monopoly. Yeah. But that also means someone beating you on one conference now has 50% of the major market share.
Right.
And I wonder from a diversity perspective, diversity of portfolio, does it make sense? Because I understand why the talk is that ESPN's pushing these narratives, but if you have a conference like the ACC that's been loyal to ESPN, that, by the way, just announced, we didn't even talk about this, but that thing with the Pac-12 where maybe they'll try a joint championship. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to let anybody else negotiate for the rights. We're just going to go through ESPN. Well, that's kind of a safety net there, having us, a big brand, Clemson, a big brand, the U, Louisville, in that little fiefdom versus letting us get to the SEC or the Big Ten where, not that they would block it, but when people say, oh, that's all they want, well, now they're kind of putting all their eggs in one basket, 2 baskets, so to speak, and they're making it easier to steal a huge chunk of market share in one fell swoop from them.
Yeah, now we're getting into conceptually how I see the business world in this realm. But if I'm them, what I'm doing is I'm locking up those 2 major conferences, no matter what the price. I'm letting whatever's left, the the ACC, go to Fox, and I'm saying, yes,
the APAC 12,
right? Yes, Fox,
APAC Big 12,
PAC AQ 12, whatever you want to call it. I'm letting Fox get that, and I'm saying you go be that little second fiddle conference TV station that nobody's watching anymore because only real football is watched on our channel. That's what I'm doing if I'm them. Like you said, you only have 2 negotiations to do at that point. You don't have as many moving parts. I'm just letting everything else go by the wayside to whoever else wants it. And I'm focusing on the 2.
Yeah, but hey, man, that works until your stock crashes, right? That's
right.
That's like putting everything into the same index fund. I think from a portfolio diversity standpoint, I don't know. It's a thought that literally came to me as we were talking. I don't know. I think that consolidation is good for them to a point because then you also run into a pseudo collective bargaining type situation where the more powerful people you put in a room, the harder they are to keep control of. So you wonder, the more of these big brands that you put in the same pot, well, do they decide, because money will decide most of it, but college's only income is not through football revenue and not through TV revenue. So does there come a day where they say, we don't like this, and this that ESPN's doing, so fix it, or we're going to go make marginally less money at someone that doesn't do that to us over with Fox or over with NBC, or hey, with Amazon. Maybe Amazon just has $1 billion burning a hole in their pocket and they want to hop in. Wouldn't it be the first time they've done something like that? So yeah, I don't know. We'll pull on that thread a little bit later, but I don't know. Came to me as we were talking. So it's going to be interesting though, regardless, man. Like no matter what, we are going to see a very different product on the field in the 2030s than we saw in the 2020s, than we saw in the 2010s. Because the way I look at it is there are periods of change and there are periods of rest. The 80s was a period of volatile change with Miami taking off, us popping up, schools like Pitt really declining, and you saw Syracuse, they made it into the 90s, but they really, the 80s was the last of their greatness. You saw the whole of the SEC start to dip. And then the 90s was a bit, I don't want to say stable. It's never stable, but it was just like college football was played. And then the aughts was, again, boom, 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 volatility. People were getting hit with sanctions. I mean, every team that won a national championship, it felt like got hit with some kind of sanctions or Bobby Bowden got wind stripped, it wasn't the worst thing ever. Don't hate me for saying that, folks, but in comparison to what it could have been. But things were happening left and right. And then it felt like the teens, right after all that realignment stuff, just kind of, in the playoff was announced and that started, we just sort of played football for like 7 or 8 years. And now it's like the wheels are spinning again. Stuff's going all around. So I'm hoping the 2030s is a time when we can just play again, but I think it's going to be a very different looking landscape than what we are used to right now.
Last thing I'll say is I want whatever makes Florida State football games easier to watch and not having to look for the ACC XN12 network or wherever the hell that is. I'm so sick of it. Just put me in a conference where our games are televised on real channels, please.
Yes, I 100% agree with that, Dave. And I 100% agree that I love you guys coming and listening every single day. Thank you for being here. Thanks for stopping by. I hope we brought the thunder. Let us know in the comments what you think. Let us know what you want us to talk about next week. I'm sure we're going to talk about this some more because there's always a new angle to talk about. So David, thanks for rocking and rolling with me. Folks, thanks for being here. I'm Max, that's Dave, and this was Locked On Seminoles.
Go Noles.
Ugh.